Awesome. I'm Aaron Wilson Watson with LTV News, sitting down with DeRay Mckesson. So first off, how was your trip?
It was easy. I was on the train from Baltimore. It was a simple ride. I got some reading done, listened to a sermon that was good, and I'm here.
So I just kind of want to talk about a little bit of, how you got to where you are, our current affairs, and then kind of, as we're entering this year, what to look forward to in 2018. So that's kind of the way that the conversation is framed. So it's been 10 years since you did Teach for America, and a lot of your work is based in education, and I kind of want to know, how does that affect your activism?
Yeah, I taught sixth grade math, which was like one of the best things I've ever done. My students are old now. I see them on like Instagram. I'm like, you need to put that down. You need to bathe. But it wasn't until I was in the classroom that I saw the urgency of the work very viscerally. Like, I'd always believed in equity. I was an organizer when I was a kid, and all of that stuff was really important, but there was nothing like walking into a classroom and like I was math. Like, it was just me. Like, I had to be that for my students. And seeing young people do things that they didn't think they could do was like one of the most transformative things. And then I went to go be a senior leader in public school systems, and it helped me think about what it means to have change at scale. So when I think about like what comes next, it is about having scale solutions. Like, how do we make sure that we can move the dial for everybody and not just like 10 people at a time or 20 people at a time? Like, we can actually do things at scale. And it wasn't until working in school systems that I saw that possibility in that way.
You talked about like how, you were involved in activism as a kid. Can you like elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so I was in Baltimore's a youth grant making organization where it's like 20 young people, 10 adults who are like a philanthropic organization giving money to young people in communities who want to do youth-led community projects, and I help lead that organization. And then I was a youth organizer with the policy think tank in the city. So I did that for what seems like most of middle school and high school, like going into neighborhoods and teaching young people and adults how to work together was part of that work. And I was also in student government. So those things were like formative skill building experiences. Teaching, and then I opened up an after school center after I was teaching, like really helped me think about like what systems and structures, how they impact people's lives, especially our youngest citizens.
So last year you were working with Baltimore school system.
I just left on August 1st of this year. Yes, I was the chief of human capital for the past year.
Why did you leave?
So it always was supposed to be temporary. I'd originally committed to do 3 months and stay for 12 as a favor to the superintendent. I believe in the work of districts. Like, I think that we have to be as organized on the inside as we are on the outside, that has to be a part of the strategy. At this moment, I think that I can be most helpful to this overall work, not necessarily being there, but that is important work. I loved it. I was responsible for all hiring of all staff for the district and managed our human capital. We employ as many people as the city of Baltimore, so about 11,000 employees, 50 people that reported to me. So it was a lot of work. I managed our healthcare program. We had about 20,000 people on our plan. So I learned a ton. It was informative. I'd done that work that was my professional career, was like human capital work after the classroom. But I wanted to continue this fight, like not necessarily working for the school system, but I always love it. The superintendent is an incredible superintendent. The school system in Baltimore has a lot of work to do, but is on the right track.
So can you talk about your current projects that you kind of have on your plate now? I listened to Pod Save the People.
Appreciate it.
It's good. Can you kind of talk about that and what that does and the importance of that?
Yeah, so when we think about what Twitter does, is that Twitter is a place where we like share information. So the protest would not have happened if it wasn't for Twitter. We wouldn't have been able to organize or like tell people what was happening. I got to a point though where I was concerned that people weren't learning. Like, I knew that people were sharing information. It wasn't clear that people were like actually learning. So I was trying to think about the podcast as a space where people could like learn differently. So we get people that you wouldn't otherwise see. So like Mirza Baranaran, who's one of the leading experts on the racial wealth gap, or like Annie Slavitt, who used to lead Obamacare, or so many other people who like you might not hear. Tomorrow's episode will be Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator from New York State, and like we talk about, she used to be not very good on immigration. She used to be really bad on immigration. I asked her, like, you've made a 180, why? And like her answer was great. So I wanted it to be a place where people could like learn from from each other, and like I wanted to create that space, so that was important to me. You know, I think about as people of color, we always face these issues of erasure, and erasure often manifests in two ways. One is that either the story is never told or it's told by everybody but us, and in these moments we become the unerased. Like we become our own storytellers, the people who can control our own narratives. It's important that we do that in as many spaces as possible. So the podcast was another space to do it. It was important to me that Brittany and Sam and Clint were also there, because people don't need to just hear me. Like I wanted there to be a space so we could do that. And we set up the news segment to be a place where we weren't just talking about Trump all day, but you were being exposed to things that you otherwise might not be.
So, I mean, you talked about Twitter, and you have now over 1 million followers on Twitter, and the importance of telling your narrative and telling our narrative. In recent history, in recent news, net neutrality has kind of been under threat. So what would that look like, and how does that affect activism? How does that affect the way we tell our story? How does it affect those spaces for connection?
I don't know yet. Like I meet with I'm gonna meet with Ajit, the chairman of the FCC, on Friday. So I'll talk to him then. So yeah, that's like the best. This is the first time I'm saying I'm meeting with him on Friday, but I'll be meeting with him on Friday to talk about that. But as you've seen, like this could have dire consequences for the way that we sort of exist online. But I'm holding out until we have our conversation in person on Friday.
Lighter or different news. In terms of the culture, we've seen, the Grammy nominations are out. People of color lead the nominations. Jay-Z has the most. How is art, a part of this conversation? How is art promoting change? And is this a reflection that we are moving? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think about art as like both a window and a mirror. Like a window in the sense of helping us see what is possible and what we might not yet imagine, and a mirror to help us see ourselves better. And I think that art at its finest does that. I think that in this moment we see Black artists like helping us wade through this moment in a really beautiful way, helping us sort of imagine what is possible. So when you think about Formation, people didn't think that was Beyonce, right? But like that is Beyonce. Or when you think about Cranes in the Sky, like people needed a song to process. When you think about so much of K-Dot, like that is about processing this moment. And I think that we've seen our artists respond to what is happening and also push us to imagine a different world and a more beautiful world. So I think that in many ways we're just at the beginning of this. I think that there's so many people sort of finding their space and finding their voice. We think about people like Colin, right? Who like, he gets it and he's excited about this work. And it's only people of color who have to choose between a profession and thinking that the world should be better, right? And like, we should allow all of the people that impact culture, not just our singers, but our athletes and any type of artist, to be able to like be a dope professional and be somebody who thinks that the world should be great. White people always get to be both. So white people get to be like a dope accountant and a PTA mom, but it's like Colin is like either a football player or an activist, right? And it's like, I don't care how you self-identify as long as you believe the world should be better and fight for it. And part of that is like naming it and then creating space for people to do their best work.
I mean, you kind of talked about activism, everyone kind of having that responsibility. For college students, such as myself, how can we get involved, right? And how do we find our voice? How do we find that passion? How do we start that process?
Yeah, I think that, I can tell you that I find that this is like yours to find, right? That like you got to follow what you love in your heart. A couple things that I always say to college students or like students in general is that like you need to leave this institution a better reader, writer, and thinker. If all you do in 4 years is fight the institution, you failed. So I've met a lot of people who they leave and they're like, we got that dope statue and we changed the African American Studies department. And like they can't read, they can't write, they can't like engage in a conversation. And that's not a win, right? That like we need you to come out of here like more skilled than you came in. And like that has to be a priority for you. I've seen people of color like not do that to their disadvantage. The second thing is that like every part of our society can be better. So part of what I think your responsibility is at every institution you're a part of is to push it to be its best. So, the conversation about inclusion or diversity and inclusion is, we think about diversity as about bodies, so you can recruit 50 more trans students. We think about inclusion as about culture. So you can recruit 50 more trans students and only have men and women's bathrooms, and like you've won on the diversity front and you failed on the inclusion front. So I think there are a lot of places trying to think through like what culture actually feels like. I think there's also a deep opportunity for us to talk about what it means for institutions that benefited from slavery and a long legacy of it to like do something bigger, and like what is their responsibility in community. I'm interested in that. And the third is like your responsibility to make sure that you come out of here a better reader, writer, and thinker, that if you can't imagine it, you can't fight for it. And if you don't learn how to imagine a better world while you're here, then like you haven't done your work.
And then lastly, we're at the end of the year. There's been big pushes forward, like what has happened with General Flynn. There's been kind of big threats on the parameters. I mean, there's so many things that are happening. What's the state of activism? Are you hopeful going into 2018?
You always have hope. You know, I think that it has been beautiful to find people all across the country or to see people all across the country who understand their power now. And like that has been beautiful. I think about when we were in the street in Ferguson during the initial wave of protests, we knew that people were standing with us. We didn't know that people were going to stand wherever they were. And that happened spontaneously, like that was one of the most beautiful things about all of this. And that spirit has stayed. If there's anything that gives me pause, I'm worried that there are people who believe that the history of injustice in this country began with the Muslim ban, right? That people think that like America just got bad for people, and like we know that it's been bad for people for a long time. And I worry about that. I worry about like, will people still fight when Trump isn't screwing over everybody? Like, will they still be in the middle of the street? But for now, I think that the fatigue won't hit too hard. I think that people are trying to figure out like what are the concrete things they can do. I think that people have like mastered the stand in the street. 3 years ago, they had mastered it. Now I feel like people got it. And the same thing with phone calls. It's like, you know, how many times can you call your senator? So what does change look like at the local level and at scale? And by local, I really mean just not at the national level. I think that will be the next phase of this. I'm mindful too, the civil rights movement was a decade long worth of activism. So we, in so many ways, are just getting started.
On that note, that was beautiful.
Cool. Awesome. Done.